Mike, are you there? Can you hear me? How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you two?
Doing
We're
great. Great to
fantastic.
have you.
Yeah,
It's
thanks for having
yeah,
me.
it's a wonderful Monday. I hope your Easter was well. If you celebrate, I hope your weekend was great, and I hope you're off to a great start of the week.
Thanks. It was great. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to kick it off with just a little bit of background on your career, and then what you're excited about today, and then we can kind of go from there. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. Um, so let's see. My career. I've been I've been an investor for the past decade. Kind of an accidental investor. I never aspired to this, but I sort of I spent 15 years operating. I was at Facebook for many years and decided to give it a try, and it's been great. So I've been an investor for the past decade. I am like uh, I'm very motivated just by like individual founders and folks that I find compelling, and so like a pretty broad set of companies. So like a mix of consumer and like SaaS and hardware and infrastructure and some others. Some of the larger companies are companies like Rippling and Notion and Verkada and Clay and a couple
Oh
others.
yeah, we just heard about Clay from
Yeah.
David Tish. What
Say
was
again?
the what was, yeah, we just heard about Clay. David
From
Tish from Box
Oh
Group
yeah,
was
yeah,
on,
of
and he
course,
was
yeah, yeah.
saying about how Clay was this overnight success that took 7 years, but as they usually do. I'd love to know the story of the first investment that really made you catch the bug. Obviously, you were at Facebook for a long time, but then at some point you were like, I got a knack for this, and I'm going to take it more seriously.
Um, I made a handful of angel investments before I like formally became an investor.
Sure.
But they were, I think in retrospect, they're actually like they're pretty reasonable. Like I only made a handful. Um, I probably made like seven or eight. One of them was Notion, which is
Hmm.
probably the best of the bunch. But like Wealthfront, it was like Notion and Wealthfront and this company called Human Interest, which is like a 401(k) provider and a
Oh
couple
yeah,
others.
I know the
Uh,
CEO.
Say again?
I'm like randomly friends with Jeff Schneebly, who runs the company now. It's
Oh
a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
fascinating story because it was a YC company, and then
Yes.
he came in as like a founder mode CEO, but he had like his background. I mean, I love him, but it's like not super. He didn't start the company. He has a MBA, and I believe he has a PhD, and he's almost like a manager mode type of guy. But he's been fantastically successful with the company, and I'm just the biggest fan. Anyway, sorry, a little bit
Yeah, no, no,
digression.
exactly, exactly. But I think none of them really motivated me to do it. It was more so I was lucky enough to join Facebook when it was relatively early, like a few hundred people, and I was there for 8 or 9 years. And I led a mix of sort of product and engineering at the company. Um, and I was my wife and I had our first kid, and it was the first time that I took like 6 weeks off for paternity leave, and it was a little bit of it was like the first chance to catch my breath in 8 or 9 years, and I was trying to figure out like what I wanted to do next.
Hmm.
And the obvious thing would have been to stay at Facebook, and Facebook was, and I think still is, just one of the most amazing companies out there. But I'd gotten to know a guy named Brian Schreier at Sequoia, and Brian had actually backed two of my close friends at the Series A, a guy named Matt McGinnis, who's now the COO at Rippling,
That's right.
and Steve Garrity at a company called Hearsay. And Brian had kind of said, if at some point you decide to pop your head up and do something else, you should come talk to us. And so one thing led to another, and I ended up at Sequoia. And it was a little bit of an experiment to just see if investing would be fun and interesting. And as it turns out, it is both fun and interesting. So
how did
That's great.
you, people talk about quote unquote operate, investors love to say if they've spent, 2 years at a company, they love to say they've had operating experience. You had some very real operating experience at Facebook. How did you feel? Um, how did you feel? How durable were the learnings from the true operating experience versus finding sort of common truths about the way to do business and the way to build products and teams that because I've found like for example like the influencer marketing that I maybe did in 2016 like no longer works, right?
Mm,
But yet there were things that I learned in that era that I
sure,
still
sure,
use
sure.
today, right? So how do you kind of delineate like
But
sort
at
of
like a
like
higher level of
Lindy, yeah,
abstraction,
higher
yeah.
level sort of these sort of Lindy ways of doing things that are durable and valuable to communicate to entrepreneurs that you back?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will say one thing that I think I learned that still applies, and one thing I had no clue about, which I didn't learn until like the investing side of things. I think one thing that's underrated, maybe it's not underrated, about Mark at Facebook is that he's incredibly patient. I mean, I guess you kind of see it. I think he's like spent $80 billion so far on like Reality Labs.
Yeah.
But I think, he is at the same time both like patient and impatient. I mean, everyone talks about like the move fast, break things, and I think there is like a very strong bias towards action and just like getting stuff done. But he also, like, from a first principles perspective, kind of if something should work, like if something logically makes sense, he will just keep playing it out to try to until there's like new data that suggests that it is wrong, which I think explains a lot of the Reality Labs investment. And I think one thing that's underappreciated about like a lot of great companies, maybe it's appreciated, I don't know, but like they take a long time. Like, I mean, some companies are really fast and off to the races, but like, Figma was like 4 or 5 years before it started to work. Notion was like 4 or 5 years before it started to work. Clay was 4 or 5 years before it started to work. I think Airtable like was founded in 2010 and didn't really sort of break out until maybe 2017, 2018. I mean, all the sort of the PLG companies, everyone says they like want to be a PLG company, which to me is like, yes, I want to be a high growth company. That is
I don't want to have to do sales. I want to grow quickly without doing sales too.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I also want to be born rich and handsome, but what are you going to do? It takes. I mean, these companies just take a lot of bake time, and I think if you've operated for a while and you've seen how like if you viscerally understand patience and like if you're doing random stuff or if you're like literally there's no hope, then you should probably throw in the towel. But in a lot of cases, if you're doing the right thing and it just hasn't hit yet, you just kind of you got to play out some more cards. And I do think I've observed a lot of financial investors having if it's not up into the right 3 months in, it's like, oh man, we made a mistake, and like, what the hell are you doing? Or I was talking to a founder recently who has like a financial investor on the board now, and they were like, your competitor is, at 5 million in ARR. Why aren't you at 5 million in ARR yet? Which is like, I get it on one level, but on another level, like you just gotta, I think you got to make sure you're doing the right thing and sort of doing it in the right way. So I think that was one lesson that definitely carried over from operating, which I think you kind of don't have until I think is correlated with people who have done it and sort of understand the messiness of building something. I will say conversely, I was at Microsoft before Facebook, and in both cases, you're pretty insulated from like the market you're operating in. Like I think once you get to a certain scale, you're kind of just thinking about how to build new things for your existing customers as opposed to how to really like start in brand new markets. And so I had no real intuition for how to like evaluate a business and whether it was a good business or a bad business, and if it was how to think about there were obviously sales and marketing teams at both Microsoft and Facebook, but you don't really build an intuition for how to like attack a new business category, I think, unless you've worked at a startup. So that was all new to me.
I have a question. I've heard founders bring up the example of Figma as a company that took a long time to get a product out into the market and get traction. It was like 4 or 5 years until the first million of ARR. And I've heard founders use that as a reference point and be like, we're doing the Figma thing. Like, It's going to take a while. And I'm like, no, you're not. They were doing something that was like fundamentally, very technically difficult, leveraging a new technology when there was they were operating in a space that maybe wasn't hot for different reasons, like, sort of cloud design collaboration. You had sure there was other players, but they had sort of 4 years to be.
Multiplayer wasn't a trend.
Multiplayer wasn't a thing. They sort of created that.
Yeah.
So what would you say to founders that tell you, oh yeah, we're doing this, but then you look at the market and you say, well, you have 4 or 5 other companies that have sort of more advanced feature
Sure.
sets, maybe, and are highly, it's highly competitive.
Yep.
And I feel like that having the opportunity to do the Figma thing is like a luxury of being like very early.
Yeah, you got to
to
earn that. You
something.
got to be Dylan to earn that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, if anyone came in and said it was going to take like 4 or 5 years to build Figma, I don't think anyone would build Figma. 2, I don't think anyone would fund Figma. I think there's an element of, like you have to, I think you have to be moving quickly in the short term. Like anyone, sometimes founders will come in and say, I mean, what is it? It's April, and they will be like, oh yeah, we'll be ready to launch at the end of the year. And unless you're like taping out silicon or something, that scares the crap out of me, because I don't know, there's a lot of time between now and the end of the year.
Yeah.
And so I think you want someone that is just like iterating at an insane clock speed and like learning at every iteration. And I think those iterations have to be pretty fast. But like sometimes you just don't know when it's going to start to catch. And so I know the Figma story less well than some of these others. But it's, you're just talking to David, and you guys
Notion's a good example too, right?
Yeah, I was going to say,
they
like,
were toiling away, doing something, in relative obscurity till they found the thing that really was magical.
Yeah, one of my favorite set of videos, you can find it online, is there's like a Notion product demo from I think late 2013. And it's like this low code, no code environment. There's all these blocks. There's like a Stripe block, so you can like drop payments in. Like it's a pretty, it's a pretty wild demo, because you see like the through line from today to what it was back then. And it's clear like all the ideas are basically the same. It's like this canvas and it's got blocks and you can drop all this stuff in. But of course, like the first iteration was like wildly complex, and no one really used it other than like a handful of like diehard folks that figured it out. And so, of course, like the rethinking of it was, okay, we'll make this an insanely great note-taking app, and then go from there, note-taking to Wiki and the like. And Notion's an interesting example because I think there's like incredible stubbornness on the vision. And I think like what Ivan has been trying to build has like not changed in 12 or 13 years. But there was like a lot of flexibility on tactics. And it was like, okay, this thing didn't work. Let's try it again until something caught. And I think that's kind of the art of it, is like have a really clear vision of where you're like what you're trying to build over a 5 to 10 year window, but just move insanely quickly and be willing to like constantly change tactics.
I've been super excited about the idea of a email client built ground up around AI.
Yeah.
It seems like an obvious startup idea. We saw like the mailbox era where Dropbox bought Mailbox, and there was a new email client startup every few years. Now we're in this dangerous territory where, you have a company like Notion where founder mode CEO at the helm, plenty of resources, clearly not asleep at the wheel, understands what AI is capable of. But as a product manager or just a user of email, how do you think about AI in the context of email? What are you hoping for? I have an idea in my head of what I want, but I think I might be wrong, just because that's the nature of these things. So how would you break down that problem? How do you think about AI email?
Yeah, I think actually this is one I've thought a decent amount about. Actually, in the beginning, so if I go back like 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, my like theory of the world of like what would be interesting to invest in was there's kind of like 3 levels of the stack. There's kind of like the foundation models at the problem. There's all this at the bottom. There's like dev tools and infrastructure in the middle, and then there's like applications at the top. And I was like generally pretty pessimistic on the dev tools and infrastructure space because I think it's just moving really quickly. At the application layer seemed like the obvious place to invest, and you can kind of subdivide the application layer into like I would say like head, torso, and tail, or like horizontal and vertical, however you want to split it. And I was actually pretty skeptical at the time it was clear to me like I should not be writing my own emails in 2025, or to like a very small degree. Like there is a massive amount of corpus. I've had like a Gmail account for 21 years at this point.
Yeah.
Like it should just be able to write every single email for me. But it's 2025 and I'm still writing my own emails. Like it maybe gives me like 2-word completions.
Yeah.
And I think I have two conclusions from this. One is like the large tech companies are just, I think, way too risk averse to build anything good here.
Yeah.
Like like this Google must be able to build this. Like
Yeah.
it seems like a very trivial problem. I assume like the risk of me accidentally saying something really offensive in email is just too high for them to launch anything here.
Yep.
And so and I think that's kind of true writ large. Like there is also like, there is not a great assistant experience yet. Like Siri is still pretty bad. You can get like the Meta AI assistant is actually pretty good if you're wearing like the Meta glasses, but you have to wear the glasses to use it. And so I actually think the horizontal experiences are addressable by startups now, because I think the big tech companies are just going to be too conservative. And then in terms of like the experience that I want, I mean, I don't really want, I'm like pretty good at email. I'm a very diligent person. I like go through all of my emails. I get a lot of them. Reading them is like pretty fast. I don't need it to be summarized. If someone sends me a really long email, like I'm probably not going to read it anyway. Like I don't need it summarized. Like it is a negative signal if you send a very long email.
Yep.
The hard work is replying to them. And if something could just read the thing and like write exactly what I was going to write, that would be an amazing experience, especially if I worked on mobile, because like composing on mobile is a total pain in the ass.
Yep.
And so I'm amazed someone hasn't built that yet. It doesn't seem like there are a lot of hard problems out there. That does not seem like the hardest problem. And so I'm surprised.
We're seeing a lot of bolt-on AI narratives in the public markets. Are you seeing the AI narratives take hold in the fundraising around like scale-ups, growth stage companies that aren't AI native companies, but they make so much sense in the context of AI?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think AI is like very core to Notion, for instance, and so I think Notion has like a very deep advantage here. And I think it's just like the next evolution of Notion. I think I don't know if I have enough data points on this. I mean, the thing about AI, in my view, is like it is not to. I never went to business school, so I may get the definitions of all this wrong. It's a layperson's understanding. But like in the sustaining versus disruptive innovation, I think AI is like pretty clearly a sustaining innovation in almost all cases.
Sure.
I think it like might be disruptive to Google.
Yep.
And so, assuming like a scale up is still competent and can still build new product, I think they can just kind of adopt this stuff as opposed to being disrupted by it. So
yeah, this is the Salesforce for mobile was just Salesforce. And so you could imagine that Salesforce AI winds up working potentially, or at least they'll hold on to that for a while. But it is a fun time, because at least at the very least it's like a new battle for everyone to fight out. Like the Gmail team needs to pay attention, because Notion's coming for them. I love to see it.
Do you recommend sabbaticals?
Oh yeah. I most definitely do. I had like worked continuously from when I was 14 years old. I like worked at a startup in high school and college, and then I took off like a week between college and Microsoft, and like 3 days between Microsoft and Facebook, and a week between, maybe it was 10 days between Facebook and Sequoia. I took off almost 2 years. I say took off because I kept like 15 boards, and so I was on like 30 hours of board meetings and one-on-ones a week. But it was still amazing. I got to like play baseball with my kids almost every day. Now they're pretty good at baseball. I knew nothing about baseball, and so now I know something. And I think I was terrified that I would just be like irrelevant after taking some time off. But I don't know, maybe I am. But it was very
Still got it.
It was amazing, and I just like I would rather like getting to hang out with my kids is like the best thing in the world. So.
I feel like saying that you're on a sabbatical allows you to release the FOMO, which, like, as an investor, there's probably no stronger force, right? It's like
Yes,
the
yes.
founder wants to talk, and
I should probably take this call.
why conviction, and why partner with Sarah? I have a bunch of, like, guesses, but I'm assuming you could have basically gone anywhere, any firm, raised 500 million out the gates on your own, whatever. I'm curious to hear.
Well, I've known Sarah for a long time, almost a decade. Though I recently discovered that she sent me like a LinkedIn message in like December 2016, which I did not see until like 2 weeks ago.
Amazing.
But I thankfully ran into her in other contexts. And I think my theory on I'd spent a bunch of time thinking about emerging managers and like what is the right strategy for starting a new firm. And I think one thing that is underappreciated, or maybe I certainly underappreciated for a long time, is the degree to which like venture firms, there's this funny thing where like people who work in venture kind of get like a little bit ruffled when you call their thing a company instead of a firm, because it's not a company, it's a firm.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like firms and companies are like first cousins, and they're all just organizations. And I think that if you're doing a startup, generally you don't say, I have an exception to this, but generally you don't say like, I'm just going to go like build the next Google. Like that seems like a kind of crazy thing to do. You start off with a market that seems kind of small, you dominate that market, then you expand to like the next tier of market and then the next tier of market, and suddenly you build something gigantic. And I think the same thing is true in venture. Like it's hard to just go out of the gate and be like, I'm going to be the next gigantic global multi-stage firm. I think you got to like pick a market and go dominate that market and then sort of expand from there. And if you look at over the past like 10, 15, 20 years, the folks that I think have done this well, it's like Matt at Paradigm with crypto, it's Mickey at Ribbit with fintech. AI was clearly going to be
A thing.
the most important thing over like the next 10 or 20 years. And so I think building a firm focused on AI and intelligent software and becoming the sort of preferred partner for founders in that category and then expanding from there seemed like the optimal strategy. And I think that's very much the founding thesis of Conviction. And I think like Sarah and Pranav and the team here were off to an amazing start. So I've known them for a while. I think the thesis makes a ton of sense. And it's really fun. I think like one thing that is underappreciated in venture, back to this like firms versus company thing, is like venture is fundamentally predicated on the idea that there are things that like a 2-year-old startup can do that like are hard for a 50-year-old company. But then when you but venture is like not always that introspective about itself. So I think there is a belief that there are things that like a 2, 3, 4-year-old startup that is in founder mode can do that maybe a 30, 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old venture firm cannot.
So when's the IPO? I know Andreessen's going out. General Catalyst, we're hearing rumors about.
Conviction, Q4.
I'd like to see them in
how
Q4.
have you, what's your broad, I'd love to give you a few minutes to talk about enterprise adoption of AI. We talked last week about how Johnson & Johnson had basically piloted, 30 plus different AI tools.
Wasn't it like 600?
It might have been like 300. I might have it off by like an order of magnitude. It was like they basically tried hundreds of tools across different teams.
It was called like the Thousand
And then they've
Flowers
just been,
program.
basically culling, a bunch of stuff that was cool but didn't quite work. What are you seeing as somebody who is, I'm sure, at times a big buyer on the other side at Facebook?
Well, I mean, certainly there are things that are working. Like obviously Cursor, Cursor is working in a gigantic way. I think Harvey's working in a gigantic way. Decagon and Sierra seem like they're doing really, really well. I caught some of the conversation you were having with David right before this, and you guys were talking about rappers a little bit. And I don't love the term rappers, and to me, there's like back to like the bottom, middle, top thing. You can kind of like, if you're going to build an interesting company, I think you either have to attack it from you have the handful of researchers that can literally push the state of the art forward, which is like maybe 8 organizations in the world, or you know and understand and like love and can serve a type of customer better than anyone else in the world and just like build down from the customer. So you're either like building up from the technology or building down from the customer. And so I mean, I think that the companies that are working, I think just like just have really good taste and like deeply understand what their buyers, like what the customers need, and are figuring out how to like adapt the technology to that. And then I think there's a bunch of folks that are like not, or kind of like hypothesizing what people might need, but don't like viscerally understand it, either because they haven't worked in it or they're just like they haven't figured it out yet. And I think that's the stuff that is probably churning. But I mean, I think it's kind of standard at this point in the cycle. Like some things are working, some things are not. I think more things will work. I think the defining characteristic will be like a deep focus on the customer, like the buyer, and like building a great product for them.
Do you expect big tech broadly to get more and more acquisitive? We were talking with David too around, just this era, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when you had companies buying, a single big tech company, even a Twitter, would buy many, many, many companies, and it was probably healthy for the ecosystem broadly. And then, now, on the show last week, we spent a bunch of time talking about, the FTC's, what they're doing to Meta around something that happened, many, over a decade ago. But I'm curious, what's your outlook on M&A?
I mean, I hope so. I mean, I think it all got shut down just due to government action, and I think like misplaced government action. I mean, I think there hasn't really been anything interesting on the consumer front in over a decade. Like probably, I mean, if you ignore TikTok, and TikTok has like 1 million asterisks next to it, it's basically ChatGPT, I guess, and ChatGPT is obviously super interesting. But there haven't, if you look at the 2008, 2009, 2010 era, there was Instagram, there was Snapchat, there was WhatsApp, there was Uber, there was Lyft, there was DoorDash, there was Instacart. And part of that is just like the mobile phone and obviously like all the change that ushered in. But I think part of the problem is, especially starting around maybe it's probably 2016, 2017, there was just this crackdown on the ability to do acquisitions by big tech. And I mean, especially for consumer has this property that like very, very, very few things are going to work. But if it works really big. But if it doesn't work, it's often like really talented entrepreneurial founders that can then either like take what they've built to a larger company and adapt it for that, or work on something else at that larger company. And if you shut down the outs for those consumer companies, like eventually people just stop funding them. So like every year, some venture capitalist is like, this is the year that consumer is back. And I don't think consumer will fully be back until either there's like some massive platform shift, or like those companies can get acquired.
Speaking of consumer, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on consumer agents. I was talking with a founder last week that had an idea for a consumer agent in the insurance space, and it was a great idea. Seemed like it'd be a very, very valuable product. And I basically explained my point of view is that even if OpenAI is not explicitly saying that they're going to do this specific use case, the sort of natural evolution is that at some point you will be able to use OpenAI to do a series of tasks like he was describing. How do you think of do you see opportunities in consumer agents broadly, or given the foundation model's sort of emphasis on the application layer and building consumer products, that it's sort of a dangerous path to be building on?
Yeah, I thought for a while, there seems like there's some intrinsic tension between being a great research lab and being a great product company. Like with the exception of OpenAI, like most of the other folks haven't shipped that much product. Anthropic is starting to ship some product, and then OpenAI has had some complexity over the past couple of years. I think I don't know. I think there may just be some like intrinsic tension between being great at research and great at product. And I think that is good news for founders that are building like horizontal products. And so I do think, I mean, this is kind of like the email thing. There's no great like AI assistant yet for people. And it seems like it is a thing that is possible to build. I think the more general purpose you are, like if you're building something literally for multiple billions of people, I think the higher the likelihood that you're like in a really square dead conflict with the foundation model providers. But I think, I mean, this goes back to the like building down from the customer. If there's some set of customers you can go build for that is even hundreds of millions of people, I think, I don't know, like a company, a lab like OpenAI has, like they have so many important things to work on. Like there has to be, and I have incredible respect for OpenAI, but it's like, if you have some strict stack ranking of the teams within OpenAI, like only 10 problems can have like the top 10 teams on it. And so if you're doing anything after like the top 10 problems that they have, then you're like by definition don't have one of the top 10 teams working on it. And that seems like an opportunity for a
Good
startup.
opportunity. Yeah.
It's a great conversation.
I have a lot more questions.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back
soon.
soon because I mean, you can just talk about everything that's going on. It's amazing. We really appreciate you taking the time. So,
Yeah.
thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me. Okay,
Cheers.
have a good one.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.